On this episode of the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, we have a total eclipse of the heart of camp. We'll tell you what that means in just a second. Welcome to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, where we turn numbers into stories and data into insights. We dive deep into theology and research, paired with practical wisdom and action steps to help camping ministries thrive. I'm your host and producer, Jared Rendell, a camp enthusiast and part of the Sacred Playgrounds team. This podcast features Dr. Jake Sorensen, a scholar, author, practitioner, and the founder of Sacred Playgrounds. Be sure to subscribe, submit a question to us to be featured on the podcast, and click that support button to help make these episodes happen. Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Sacred Playgrounds or at sacredplaygrounds.com. Wonder with us what God might have in store at your sacred playground. Here we are. Welcome to the playground, everyone. Jake, everyone is in, I'm confident, everyone is in this existential dilemma right now because they want to jam to the theme song, but now they also have Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart in their head, and there's just a tension going on in their musical brain.
You definitely set that up for people, and you know that people had that on their playlist this week, and so
They did.
Well themed, my friend. Well themed.
Right. We're gonna embrace it today. That's the plan, everybody. We're recording this. We're recording this on the week of when much of the world I had a solar eclipse. Total for a bunch of it. So we'll tell you stories about that. Myself here in Minnesota, we got to experience thick cloud cover. Is the most amazing thing we got to experience on that day. But you got to take an adventure, and that got us to thinking a little bit about just some connections with what we experience in something so amazing like that, like an eclipse, and some connections with some camp ideas. So we're gonna kind of unpack that today, along with hearing the story about your adventure. That's the plan. By the way, how are you?
I'm great, man. I'm great. I'm a little tired. We road tripped it, so I am a little tired, but I'm recovering and just looking at a lot of things on the plate as summer quickly approaches.
Mm-hmm.
And all of our camp listeners are feeling me right now, only more so because they are actually still practitioners, and I'm just trying to support them in whatever ways we can. So there's a lot to do, and it's an exciting time.
Truth.
So doing great.
All right. So that is our plan today. We are gonna we're gonna hear Jake's story a little bit and make some connections with this eclipse. So if you were lucky enough for your camp to be in the path of totality without cloud cover, and you got to see something amazing, or you watched the NASA stream like my family did. So we're gonna talk about that today. It's gonna be fun. Before we do that, we have got a quick camp question to ask.
Quick camp question.
All right, this question comes from our friend Ashley Hubbard. Was listening to our episode 14 of this season, the staff training checklist episode. So everybody can go back to that if you'd like. It was a really fun episode to do. And so we talked in one of those checklist items about these leaders, these like program staff, directors, folks like that, to continue to feed themselves and sharpen their own skills to do really well at what they do, and that helps those summer staff members be able to do really well at what they do. So she was saying, hey, are there some books that you recommend to help do that, to help support these staff, especially these leadership staff, in their own skill development? So we're going to answer that. Jake and I each have a book recommendation to share. Jake, why don't you go first?
Yeah. So the one that I'm going to recommend is actually one that just came out, and many of you know that we are partnering with Honey Rock Wheaton with this Rhythms of Faith project, and Rob Ribby came out with his book with his co-author Greg Robinson, who wrote Adventure in the Way of Jesus. So it's another one of those. It's a thin book about outdoor experiences, but the one that they wrote together, it just came out last year in 2023, is called Leaders Yet Discovered: Experiential Development for Emerging Leaders. And it talks about camp experiences, it talks about campus ministry experiences, and How
Yeah.
these plunging these young adults into leadership is a really important piece of their development. And so I will go ahead and recommend our good friend Rob's book, Leaders Yet Discovered.
Awesome. Okay, so I have one, and I've met this guy a couple times, and
Don't even.
he wrote this book.
Come on.
No, it is a little plug just in case you haven't read it. Jake's
Gosh.
book titled the same thing as our company, Sacred Playgrounds, is great and is just so direct, right, to exactly what we're doing. Um, so I'm being a little cheeky with the plug. If you haven't read Sacred Playgrounds, get Sacred Playgrounds.
That
You
is
can get that on
shameless. I
Amazon.
love it.
We've opened shameless. We actually we opened up our own orders in our camp store for a little bit because we had added all these fun things that we kind of told everybody to the camp store when Holy Ground came out, and we dropped a bunch of new resources and things like that. And we also have some copies sitting literally in the basement with you there, I think, Jake, to that we can send out to folks. So if you're getting Holy Ground ordered, or if you're getting one of those other resources, you can kind of easily just go and add Sacred Playgrounds too. So if you haven't read that, or if you've got another, associate staff member, assistant staff member who hasn't read that, that's ready for that kind of step to dig a little deeper into what we're doing here, I think that makes a lot of sense too. All right, my friend, tell us a story. Like you said, you took an adventure this week, and so tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so this was like, I've been wanting to see this eclipse forever. So the last one that came in 2017, I wanted to take my kids. They were pretty young at the time, and we were going to try to do a driving thing like down to Missouri or over to Ohio, and it would have been, a 10 to 12 hour drive, and we saw that it was going to be cloudy, and we decided that it just wasn't going to work, and partly because there was going to be this next one in 2024. And so like I was all in. I'm going to go and do this. But my oldest is in college now out in Colorado, and it was like, there's a lot of work stuff. Are we going to be able to do this? And so I was hoping to get into one of these retreats, because a lot of our camps have had retreats. And so we've got camps that we work with down in the San Antonio area. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll fly down there. I'm actually really glad I didn't, because it got so cloudy down there.
Did
And
it?
so,
Okay.
so all of these plans just kind of didn't materialize. And so I said, okay, we're going to do a drive. And if I have to do this by myself, I'm going to. And I called my brother and says, nobody wants to go with me. And he says, okay, fine, I'll go with you. And so my
Playing the
brother, who
tiny
lives in
fiddle and-
Madison, who has his own film company called Studio 88, he decided he would go with me. So I was like, okay, it's gonna be the two of us. This is great. And I let my kids know. And then my oldest, who lives in Colorado, is like, ooh, this sounds actually really good. Maybe I do want to come. And so I used airline miles to get him into Chicago. And so then we had this
nice.
plan that the three of us were going to go. And then my youngest said, oh, if my track coach will let me still run, I'll come too. And so like all four of us ended up going. And so we had a
Nice.
road
That's
trip
awesome.
crew, picked my son up in Chicago, drove south, stayed in Champaign overnight, which got us within like 3 hours of the path. And we had this plan where we're going to look at the weather forecast in the morning and decide where to go. And so
Okay.
yeah, we had this whole elaborate plan of how we were going to do this and how we were going to pick.
Wow.
And so we picked like last minute where we were going to target.
Really?
And we
I didn't
ended
know
up
that part.
in this town called Vincennes, Indiana, which is right on the Indiana-Illinois border. It's actually a historical site. It's an old frontier fort, and it had it's got a national park right there. It's a small park, but it's a nice riverfront park, and so they had live music and food trucks and the whole deal, right? And so we were there, and the experience starts, and it looks like the partial eclipse that we've seen when we've been outside of the path of totality. And so this is cool.
Yeah.
This is cool. We had our glasses on and everything, but nothing prepares you for totality. And we all agreed afterwards that the difference between like 95% and 100% totality is everything. It's everything.
Interesting.
It changed the entire experience. So like there wasn't really a difference. Like I've seen 60, 75% before when I've been outside the path. I have never seen totality. And I would say there's basically no difference between 65% and 90 or 95%. But the difference between 95% and 100% is everything. It was a total experience, a total body experiential moment where the temperature dropped 15 degrees. We had the 360-degree sunset. As we were watching, a bat flew overhead. So you got some of these nocturnal animals coming out. We saw stars, and so
Whoa.
Venus and Jupiter were prominent, and then you could see some others if you really looked. But I wasn't really looking at that because you're looking at the sun. And there was this has been documented now. Like, a lot of people asked, what was that red spot? It was a prominence from the sun that people were seeing in real time. And the sun is at a high peak of activity
Wow.
right now in the solar cycle. So there was the solar flares, and the corona looked
Sure.
really, really colorful and big. And so it was just this amazing experience that it seemed to go so quickly. It lasted over 4 minutes. Um, but it seemed to go so quickly, and we were all in awe and looking at each other and, trying to figure out what to do. But everybody was cheering. Because we were at this park. So it was just this communal experience. It was spiritual in a lot of ways as we
Hmm.
think about our smallness, as we think about
Yeah. Yeah.
the amazing intricacies of nature, and the perfection of the disk of the moon appearing the same size as the disk of the sun, and just some of what this means for
Wow.
us on this small planet, what this means for life, what it means as a community, what it meant as to be there with my family, my two boys and my brother,
Right.
together as a family. It was just amazing to soak it in. And after the experience, you kind of see as the sun starts to appear again, and you're looking through your glasses, and we started talking about it. And I asked my boys, yeah, are you glad you came? Because they both sacrificed school and stuff like that to come, and time. And they said, absolutely, that was 100% worth it. It was
Hmm.
amazing. And my oldest said something that really stuck with me. He said, that's top 5, Dad.
Hmm.
Top 5 what? Top 5 experiences of my life,
Just
in
period.
terms of,
Wow.
like, the singular nature of this experience, and how impactful, how amazing this was. Um, and so to hear something like that really hit me, because as a camp guy, as we think about things like mountaintop
Right.
experiences, and uh, hoping that people have some of these experiences, it really was something that hit me, and it led me to ask, well, what are some of the other experiences that you had, and so had a nice conversation about things like that. It was a really amazing experience. I mean, I could go on forever, but these are some of the
Right.
things that really stuck with me, about the
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. Okay, so everybody, let me just kind of pause for a second here. If you, this is a great, storytell time. If you've got pictures, right, or your camp was, whether it was in the path, partial total or whatever, or you did a day, an event or a retreat, even something like that. It would be fun to hear about that. It would be fun to, to see those pictures or whatever it is. So wherever you're seeing this, share one of those or send us a message or something like that. If you've got kind of a story, like that, whether it was you personally or something connected to your camp, we'd love to hear those. Drop in the comments or whatever it is where you're seeing this. That's amazing, man. That's amazing. That's awesome. I'm so glad that you got to have that experience. I'm so glad your kids did, like you said, for your oldest to say, hey, that's top 5, right? That's a gonna talk about it forever, gonna tell other people about it forever,
Yeah.
um, kind of
And it
thing.
is something that we can share and we can take with us now, and reflect on that
Hmm.
experience, because we had the experience together. There's a value of having that experience together, as a family, as a community, and so then you can refer back to
Yeah.
it. And so I'm excited about that, and I'm even envisioning, the next one, the next full eclipse in the United States is supposed to happen in 20 years. And so it's like, in 20 years, what if I'm there with
Hmm.
my boys again? What if we did something like that again? And what will that look like?
Oh, or their boys.
Exactly.
Oh.
They're, like, right. Don't want to
my
put too much
my
pressure on people, but
I
yes.
know, right? My younger daughter, like I said, it was cloudy here. We weren't at a
Yeah.
we weren't at a spot. We had one sick kid. We were in a spot where we could go, take a road trip or anything. And so my younger daughter was like, "Oh man," like she has no concept of what 20 years is, but she's just kind of mopey for a second. Oh, I gotta wait
Yeah.
20 years. She doesn't know what that what that means. She doesn't know the difference between 20 years and 20 minutes sometimes, but
It's
That's amazing.
it's it's just crazy because there are people that travel to see as many of these total eclipses as they can, and you're like, man, what kind of bug did these guys catch that they chase these things? And now I
Sure,
totally get it,
you get it.
because you see the partial eclipse and you're like, oh, that's really cool, but would I like travel to see that? No, you wouldn't. But that's because it's so different when you get into totality. Totality is everything in terms of the experience.
Yeah. Hmm. Okay, so you started to say something that I'm gonna ask you to say more about. Um,
Hmm.
because this is, I mean, this is partly just you, right? Because this is not a sacred playgrounds. This work, this isn't just a job for you or me or our team. Um, right, it's real vocation, right? What that word really means. So you end up interpret everything, interpreting all of these things, all these experiences, and making these connections. And so you were telling me that you made a couple, and you started to mention it, like this. We whether we've got camp for a week, a weekend, or whatever it is, like we know there's this thing about camp being a mountaintop experience,
Hmm.
and then what about the rest of life, right? And we're trying to dig in and explore that with rhythms of faith, and we'll give everybody a project update on that pretty soon. But just that idea of these rhythms, and
Yeah.
our main way of experiencing the eclipse at home was my wife did the Oreo thing, where she got a Oreos and made the Oreos on a plate. That was how we got to experience it. But this, like, it just made me think of these cycles, these rhythms.
Yeah.
It was a connection for me. So we talk about camp. We've got these mountaintops, and we want to make sure it matters for the rest of life. It gets us into a rhythm. So you made some connections there. Can you unpack that some more?
Yeah, it's so important to think about, because what is camp and what does camp need to be? And we envision camp in a couple different ways. One is this mountaintop experience, right? And one is this experience that connects to life. And so we use both of these.
Right.
I don't want to put one of these against another, because camp sometimes is this mountaintop experience. And what do we
Mm-hmm.
mean when we say mountaintop experience? Well, we mean these singular experiences that we look back to and we can say that moment, that was the aha moment. And we refer to these as mountaintop experiences largely because of the biblical references to encounters with God on the mountaintop. And so Moses experiences the burning bush on the mountaintop. Take off your shoes. This is holy ground, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
a singular experience in his life, changes the trajectory of his life. Elijah encounters God on the mountaintop, gets his mission from God there. The disciples, Peter, James, and John, on the mountain of transfiguration.
Mm-hmm.
There's this experience that changes their lives. And Peter talks about it in First Peter. We experienced it. We saw it. We heard the voice on the mountaintop. We can no longer question this. This is something that we experienced. We now have to tell the story. And so
Hmm.
there's this idea of these mountaintop experiences that we have that then stay with us for the rest of our lives. And so, when I said, um, my oldest indicated that this was top 5, that indicates that this is a mountaintop experience. And it
Mm-hmm.
allowed me to ask, okay, what are some of your other top 5? And we started having those conversations about these significant life experiences, these experiences that were just so moving or so powerful in the moment that they just stick with us. And we say, that is where my perspective changed. Or
Hmm.
I experienced something, maybe unique or really amazing that I know that I haven't experienced before, and I may never experience again. And so he talked about his time at Sky Ranch Bible Camp, where his mom and I met. He went there as a camper, got to climb one of the mountains and
Mm-hmm.
see out over the Rockies, and that being this incredibly moving experience for him. And lo and behold, now he's at school in Colorado, right?
Hmm.
You can see that these
Right.
experiences impact you. Um, he talked about our trip that we took a couple years ago to Rome and Athens, and that part of he's a history fan, so having history come alive for him and being outside the Colosseum. So he talked about experiences like that. And so some people talk about camp and their camp experiences as these significant life events, these mountaintop experiences that really
Right.
carry over with them. We've talked about this, right? I mean, you raise
Yeah,
your
that's
hand now
me.
because that was you. I've
Mm-hmm.
told my camp story before, and I've had mountaintop experiences at camp. And I've witnessed other people having these mountaintop experiences. I think I've told the
Right.
story before about the baptism that happened in Lake Tahoe under the thunderstorm. I mean,
Oh,
that,
yep.
that being this amazing keystone experience for me. Um, and so we sometimes we sometimes think of camp in this way, and for a lot of people, it is this mountaintop experience, but it's not a mountaintop experience for everybody. So, how do we envision camp not just as a mountaintop experience, but also as an experience that carries us through and carries over into our normal lives? And that's really what we're talking about with Rhythms of Faith. We're not trying to just emphasize the separateness and the holiness of camp. We're trying to emphasize how it's integrated into who we are and what we do. And so that becomes a challenge with some of these singular experiences sometimes. I have this singular experience in this other place, and then I get home, and it's tough for me to now say, how does this fit in
Mhm.
with my life? I've talked with many people that have had these experiences, sometimes giving their life to Jesus at camp, or having this experience of God, or planning to change their lives around, and then they get home and everything's the same still. What does this mean?
Mhm.
And how do they integrate this with their parents and describe this experience, and how they're going to be different now? So that can sometimes be a challenge. And so emphasizing, not just the mountaintop, but also this integration becomes super important. And so we don't want. Okay, so here's using our Eclipse analogy. If we're gonna lean into that, we don't
That's right,
want
we are.
uh, the camp experience to eclipse these other experiences of our lives, right? Because if we think of the sun as something that's life giving to all of creation and to all of life, and without the sun, life would not exist. If we then try to say, no, look at this is the most important time, and we only live for the eclipses and that beauty, then what does that mean for the appreciation of the day-to-day rhythms of life
Mhm.
and the provision that God gives to us at all times, not just on the mountaintops? We can't just live for the mountaintops. The mountaintops can be a catalyst for other experiences in life,
Right.
and the thing that leads to this other experience in life. And so you think of something like the eclipse, it was only safe to take the glasses off during totality, right? You couldn't otherwise, because if you look at the sun, you burn your retinas. Okay. And
That's
so
bad.
it's very bad, permanent damage, right? So they emphasize this. You can only take them off if you're in the path of totality, and only during totality. Otherwise, you have to keep these on. And, we sometimes emphasize camp so much, and the being on fire for Jesus, or giving your life to Christ at camp, or having this singular experience, that we risk burning these kids out, right? And so when we say something, okay, just to lean into it, when we say be on fire for Jesus, we don't mean burn your retinas,
Burn your
right?
retinas. Right.
We don't want
Right.
to send
Just so
these
we're
kids
clear.
home with burned retinas so that they're disillusioned with their life away from camp, so that they're disillusioned with the
Right.
church. They're disillusioned with their family.
Yeah.
That's the equivalent of burning the retina, I would say.
Sure.
We want them
Yeah.
to have this safe experience and to curate it in such a way that they can integrate it into their lives at home. And so how can camp be the catalyst for faith formation away from camp?
Mhm.
It's a temporary space, just like the eclipse is a temporary experience, and then we go home. Then we're sent back. The sun comes back out.
Yeah.
And so that's what I really want people to think about as they think about the way they structure their programs. Structure your programs in a way that encourages these novel experiences. Yes, climb the mountain, absolutely, but remember
Mhm.
that the
Yeah.
peaking the mountain is not uh, the end all be all of this experience. It's the journey itself. It's the walking together. It's the accompaniment that matters the most. Even though that view might be beautiful, you might not get there, and that's okay. Um, Making it to the top of the high ropes tower, we know that's not the point of the high ropes course, right? It's the
Yeah. Good
challenging
example.
yourself. It's the encouragement of the group. It's the gathering together, working through these experiences, and then processing
Mhm.
this and saying, how do we see God in this thing? It might be easy to see God in a moment like an eclipse, right? People have these aha moments uh, that leads them into new directions and new understandings. And
Yeah.
processing these more mundane experiences as well becomes so important at camp. That was a long way to answer your question. I apologize.
No, you're good. No, and you're right. You're right. And that's part of what we're like with rhythms, for example, like that's what we're trying to figure out. What are the actual things that can make these connections happen and make these things actually impact all of life when the sun's shining the rest of the year. Um, and so right now, some of what we can do right now, we have so much to learn there. So some of what we can do right now um, is maybe what's worth sharing here. And like I said, we'll give a rhythms. I'll have you give a rhythms project in just a second. But I'm thinking through one or two things, and you can add one or two as well. About okay, so right now, what are some of these ways to make sure we're doing that? I've got two quick to share.
Great.
One of them, as I was thinking about that, right? We've talked before about, we had that episode on like the case for like the Christ hike and some of
Yes.
those experiences that, are some of those, primary formative mountaintop on top of the mountaintop experiences at camp. And you already said it. What matters, maybe as much as anything in any of those, is the processing. And in that processing, so here's the call. Here's a little bit of call to action. In our processing and in our Bible studies, and in all of these other things that we do at camp that do have connectivity at home. Meals is a great example, right? These are things we're doing back home. This is when we can build bridges, right? So check yours. You're preparing training and things like that. Check your curriculum, check your schedules, check your programs, and make sure, explore how you can make home and rest of life connections in micro ways throughout that whole thing, through Bible
Hmm.
study curriculum, right? Asking questions about how is this going to play out at home? How is this going to play out with your family? How is this going to play out in school? How is this going to play out in your church experience, in your experience on the sports field? Right. So your questions, your processing questions, your Bible study questions, your DB questions should have home connectivity. Check your questions. Make sure you're not just writing stuff that is just about the story. Always bring it to connection with the rest of life, because it becomes little triggers. As those things come up, oh, here I am, and I just struck out, and instead of chucking this bat, I can have a little piece here because I know that I'm part of something larger, whatever it might be. So that's one. Number two is that I'll share is to equip the other people in their lives. We've talked lots about how important partnership is. Um, and we've also talked a lot, and again with rhythms, we're getting there, about how important the home is in terms of faith formation. It is where faith is formed. It is where we interpret these things, and the hope is that we can interpret all of this in a faith-based, faith-focused lens. So equipping, partnering well with churches, church leaders, folks like that, and equipping parents to help make these connections is important, right? So you are probably doing that in a handful of ways. We just dropped a resource into the store in case you don't have anything like this. That is a ready to edit resource, take home resource, post camp resource for parents. And it's got some layers of questions to ask, and then you get to edit it and add your summer theme and things like that. And so something like that you can place in parents' hands either at the beginning of the week so they can prepare for this, or at the very least at the end of the week, to put it in their hands. And it helps them walk through, make these connections with their campers who just had this experience. So those are two to kind of bring that home.
Yeah, this is awesome. Yeah, I mean, absolutely do those things. So in Rhythms of Faith right now, we're at the phase of the project to remind people. I mean, this is a project that is working to use camp as a catalyst for family faith formation, and
Yep.
so it's a project that we're partnering with Honey Rock Wheaton on this, and it's funded by the Lilly Endowment. It's a 5-year project. We're walking alongside camps, we're walking alongside congregations and figuring this out. And right now, we've been interviewing camp directors who say they're doing something unique and something special. And we're trying to figure out what are some of these things that they're doing. They're doing things like sending take-home materials and devotional practices for the home that they can do together with their family.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, these things that we find are seem to be the most robust are the ones that are training the campers in a specific way of doing these practices, sending home a resource that allows them to do this with their family, and prepping the parents themselves for this, usually during the closing program, but
Mm-hmm.
also during these things that you say, like at camp. When the kids are at camp, they're sending the parents home things as well so that they can walk alongside with the experience, so that the parents get this resource. They've been trained in some ways how to use it, and the campers have been trained to use it at home as well. And so it's a robust way of prepping them for these things. I connected to the Eclipse again, thinking about how the Eclipse is used by educators and how they see this is something that's coming. And this is something that can get people more excited about science. because something
Yeah.
like this makes people
Right.
ask questions. Wait a minute. Why does the sun get covered
Hmm.
entirely by the moon? That is wild. Isn't the moon much smaller than the sun? And they say, well, yeah, the sun is 400 times farther away than the moon, but it's also 400 times larger. And so that means that because of that ratio, the disk of the moon and the disk of the sun appear the exact same size in the sky at certain times of the year, right? But not all times of the year, because it's an elliptical orbit, and so you can talk about all these things, and that can lead to this
Right.
curiosity about what's going on. What is something like sun weather? What about the moon? What about space travel? And it leads to this curiosity that
Mhm.
people who are scientists now speak of these experiences as kids when they saw a total eclipse, when their parents took
Right.
them, and that got them more interested in science and more curious and asking these questions. And now they're professional scientists in some field, whether it's physics or whether it's astrophysics or whether it's chemistry or biology or astrobiology, like all these people. It's been really fun. I listen to different podcasts, and I got a couple science and space podcasts that I listen to, and so they're
Yeah.
interviewing these folks that have had these experiences and describe those experiences carrying over into their life and impacting their lives in these ways. But it took a science teacher and a parent and other people walking alongside them after and apart from the experience that really encouraged them along the way. And
Yeah.
so remembering that these camp experiences can be catalysts, and we need to help equip these other folks with the resources to help carry that over into the rhythms of their daily life, so that it's not just a singular experience where they say God was there in some special way, that God isn't here in
Mhm.
the same way,
And God's
because
not here.
that's simply
Right.
not true, right?
Right.
And sometimes camps get so excited about promoting their own programs because we want people to come back, right? And we know that camp is awesome. But remembering that we're partners with these other ministries, and we only exist as camps to support these other ministries. That's why we exist. To support the ministries of the home, to support the ministries that go on throughout these young people's lives, to support the ministries of the church. So that's why camp is there. And to keep that in mind is really important. And so how are we being effective partners with these permanent spaces, especially the home and the church?
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Amen. Thanks for sharing that story. I was thinking as we were talking, and as you're talking about some of the and my kids did that too. They came home and started spouting off this and that, and and like you said, that's such a great analogy. Exactly, like people, and whether it's science and an eclipse or whatever your thing is, of course we have these experiences, whatever our role or our passion or our vocation or whatever it is. We have some experience where our perspective changed, where we saw something and we realized, oh wait, that actually might be a call, or at least it was formative in a way that said, oh, I am energized and passionate about that. And so we end up making that in part of our lives. Of course,
This is
of
why
course,
camp
that's
can't go
exactly what
virtual,
camp
right?
can be.
Camp can't go virtual
Yeah.
because
Yep.
the experience of camp. Now, of course, we can do some of the things that we do at camp virtually, and
Right.
it's not that virtual experiences are no good, right? But the camp experience, what it is, it's a full body experience. So yes, you can watch the eclipse on TV and see, wow, that's awesome, and it can spark ideas and
Yeah, like we
understanding.
did.
But experiencing it, being there, you feel the drop in temperature, you see the bat fly overhead, you see the stars, you look around, you can't do that from the TV screen. It can only be described for you. And so this is why educators do things like field trips, right? You take a field trip to experience the thing or the place, come home more interested and excited about
Yeah.
that. So something like, we're up in the upper Midwest, and I remember taking a field trip to the Effigy Mounds national monument, which is from the Mississippian people, the mound builders, and that inspired me to learn more about the history of Native peoples in Wisconsin. It's different when you read it in a book than when you go there and you see something like the mounds that these folks built hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And so at camp, experiencing faith in a new way, experiencing community in a new way can lead us to ask more questions. And that's what we want. We want them to go home curious. We want them to go home asking questions. And we want to equip the people back home in their permanent spaces with the resources to answer these questions.
Mhm.
Because, You come home from an eclipse, there's a science teacher at school that can talk more about this and is happy to
Yeah.
talk more about this. Do they have somebody, a spiritual mentor in their lives that's happy to talk more about this? That's where the connection to church, the connection to other ministry spaces really does matter. And so encouraging that in the camp space,
Yep.
recognizing that we need to close that loop is really what we're doing in Rhythms of Faith. And so how
Yeah.
are we building not just life-changing mountaintop experiences, but an understanding of the importance of getting into the rhythm of faith with things like daily prayer, daily scripture reading, reflecting on the significance of God in our lives, and
Right.
very importantly, conversations. Having a
Yep.
conversation about God, having a conversation about faith, because the research has really demonstrated that that is
That's the
oftentimes the most impactful piece in faith formation of
period.
young people.
Mhm. So, the other thing you were talking about was like how math works effectively. We're how the distance and all of those things. We clearly like a little bit of math, a little bit of data around here. So we're gonna have some fun with our stat of the week this week.
That of the week. That of the week. That of the week.
Our stat of the week this week. Again, you can download some of these quick fun facts. We've got Eclipse stats this week. Jake, you ready?
Love it. Love it.
You ready? Here we go. Because
Lay it
these are
on me.
things these are things I didn't know. So we're gonna have some fun with this. You ready? All right. Did you know? That's what this feels like. Did you know? Because I didn't. You probably did. You dig into this more than I do. The maximum number of solar eclipses, it could be partial, annular, total, that you could have mathematically is 5. 5 per year is the most eclipses that you could have of in any of those kinds. And there are at least 2 every year somewhere on Earth. Right? So just with how the math, with how orbits works, and it is totally mind-blowing because it gets to this depth of mathematics and physics that you just can't really put that together. It's amazing. So 5 per year is the most, and there are at least 2. That was really interesting to me. I also learned that the longest possible duration is 7.5 minutes. So the longest that you could have coverage there is 7.5 minutes. Now you said totality, for you guys, it was like 4 or 4.5 or something like that, right?
Correct. Yep. So it was
Yeah.
actually long for totality, because
Yeah.
if people remember, in the fall there was another eclipse, but it was called an annular eclipse
Right.
because the moon was farther away from the Earth in its orbit at that time. So people are familiar with the term supermoon, right? So sometimes the moon is closer and it looks larger in
Right.
the sky. Sometimes the
Right.
moon is slightly farther away because it's an elliptical orbit, which is kind of like an oval around the Earth. And so
Right.
when the eclipse happens and the moon is closer to Earth, it casts a wider shadow and we get totality for longer. When it's the farthest away from the Earth that it can be and the eclipse happens, it actually doesn't cover up the entire disk of the sun. So you get what's called the Ring of Fire eclipse. And
Right.
so that's what we had,
That's right.
the annular eclipse, about 6 months ago. Because again,
Right.
as you said, they happen multiple times a year.
So fun. So fun. So there's your eclipse stats for the week, everybody. Jake, that was fun. Thanks for telling us that story. It was a little fun how easy it was to make these, just to find these connections, to make these analogies in in this in this eclipse and this experience that you guys got to have. We all got to have, and at least a little bit in some way. So
It's so
thanks,
fascinating.
man.
I mean, I love this stuff, and it's fascinating that the eclipses happen in rhythms as well. And so each eclipse
Yeah.
path repeats itself every 18
Right.
years. And it's off by about 60 degrees or 80 degrees every time it repeats itself.
Sure.
But it's the exact same trajectory across the Earth every 18 years. And so so it's called a series, a solar Saros series. And so that's what's fascinating about these eclipses too. So the ancients could actually predict when eclipses would happen. That's amazing because of their observations.
It's amazing.
So like ancient Babylon could predict some of these things. And of course, now we can predict it up to the minute because we understand orbital dynamics and things like that. But it is really cool to think about something like this happens in rhythms, and there are eclipses that are historical eclipses. So when I was traveling with my family to the eclipse, they were missing school, so I of course had to give them science lessons and math lessons and history lessons. And so we talked about some of the significant eclipses of history. So everybody, I encourage you to look up the Battle of the Eclipse. Fascinating story in ancient history where the people literally stopped fighting and the two sides made peace because the eclipse happened during a battle. And I encourage you to look up Prophetstown, Indiana, and the significance of the eclipse for Tecumseh and his warriors and bringing people together when the prophet was able to predict the eclipse. Look up the 1919 eclipse and how it helped predict or prove Einstein's theory of relativity through gravitational lensing, how you can see things a little clearer or a little differently when an eclipse happens. That's fascinating. It's another fascinating analogy. We could have used that.
Another analogy.
How does
we're out of time, man.
Gravitational lensing, relate to the camp experience? Next time that we talk about this, we'll talk about how things can come into clearer focus.
In 20 years, when the next eclipse happens, we'll be on,
we'll be here.
Season number 23, and we'll be here. We'll be ready to go. Thanks for unpacking that. Camp staff, we're praying for you as you get ready. We've got a few more episodes yet in this season. So we'll see you soon. Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/sacredplaygrounds or at Sacred Playgrounds on Instagram. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you're getting this podcast. And if you like this content and it's helpful, you can support the podcast by clicking that support button. Our theme music was written and performed by Taylor Wilson. You can find all his original songs wherever you get your music. Learn more about what we're up to and connect with the team at sacredplaygrounds.com.